Welcome back. Really excited to be starting Module 2. After the joys of Module 1, where we gave you a really thorough grounding in how to think about the music business, we are now getting down to some very specific stuff. This is vital. Obviously, the legal basis of the music industry is incredibly important, and you've made a really smart decision doing this module. The first lesson is called The Concept of Rights and Intellectual Property. It's fairly self-explanatory as we go along, so I think we best just get started on it. All right, now it is pretty obvious and pretty clear that the music industry exists because of certain legal parameters. It's not hard to understand the idea of property ownership. We've all effectively grown up having the idea of owning property drilled into us. Now, I'm not just talking about owning a house or, a block of apartments or that sort of property, although there is, an area of property law that relates to houses and blocks of land and all that sort of stuff. We don't talk about that here. This is not that sort of property. The sort of property that you're familiar with is the idea of owning personal property. And when you were in preschool or the early days of your school, you would have understood this. You turned up to school with a baseball bat or whatever it might be, and some other kid picked up your property and ran off with it, and you felt like there was something wrong. Hey, that's mine. That's my property. I own that. So even from our preschool years, the idea of owning something is something that has been drilled into us, and it makes sense to us. Now, you understand that in relation to some tangible things that you own. You own your guitar, you own your amps, you own your keyboards, you own your recording equipment, you own your cameras. Everyone understands the idea of ownership of tangible things. And reason it's easy to understand is because you can visualize it, you can pick it up. This mug here with pugs on it, you can pick up that mug, and if somebody in this room walked out with it, I'd say, hey, what are you doing? That's my property. And everyone else in the room would understand what I meant by that. It's really easy to understand physical or tangible property. But what about owning something you cannot see? Owning something that has no physical presence. Now, think about what you do as a musician. You write a song. You don't know where it comes from. You don't know what sort of divine inspiration happened to create that song, that magic trick that I was talking about in the first module. Once you've written that song, you recognize it feels like it has a value. To you, you go, all right, I've got a sense of achievement. I've got a song. It's there. I've written something. I've created something that didn't exist before my talent or my hard work or my training kicked in. I created something of value. But if somebody was to say to you, hey, that song you've written, can I see the value in that song? And you go, well, I can't really show it to you. It's not tangible. But this song is worth something. And they go, well, what is it that you actually own then? It's not a car, and it's not a guitar, and it's not a house. What is it that you own? And the answer is one word. You own rights. You have rights in your creative work. Now, you're all familiar with the concept of rights, whether it's human rights or civil rights or, the right to vote or being allowed to do something is your right. And it's the same thing when it comes to what we call intellectual property. You can own the rights in your creative work, and that is what gives your creative work value. Now, it's hard to describe. If you went into a record company and said, hey, can we see what you own? They'd say, well, Not really. I mean, maybe we own this building, or we own some furniture or some computers, and you go, yeah, but that's not what gives a record company value. And they go, no. What we actually own is the rights in 10,000 or 100,000 or 20 recordings. It's the ownership of rights that is the value in most of the creative industries. How do you protect your rights? Do you lock the door and make sure that nobody comes in and takes your rights away? No, that would kind of work for something tangible. If you wanted to, put your jewellery in a safe, that would prevent people from stealing your product, your jewellery. But you can't do that with rights. Can you put your rights in a safe? Lock the doors? Probably not. So how do you protect your rights? And the answer is the law of intellectual property. All right, so there's a lot of words right in that sentence. All right, your rights, copyright, a lot of rights involved. The legal basis of the law of intellectual property is that it's society's way of encouraging innovation, creativity, and originality. Our society, and this, as we'll see later in this lesson, this spreads pretty much right around the world. Our society has decided that if somebody creates something that's new or original, something that is associated with them and them alone, that they can, under the various parts of the law of intellectual property, they can own what it is that they've created. So, if you invent something, the law says, hey, we have a thing called the law of patent, and you can own the rights to your invention. And you can imagine for many, many companies, technology companies, pharmaceutical companies, all of those sort of companies, the right to own something that they invented, the product of their research and development, is hugely valuable, and that is the law of patent. You might have created a brand, a reputation. People connect to you in some way. Consumers understand what your logo or your name stands for, and that's the law of trademark. The law of copyright is what protects your original creative works. So, what are these rights that you get under the law of intellectual property? Well, the good news is what you get is the ability to enforce your rights. It's all very well owning rights, but what happens if you're not able to enforce those rights? They're worthless. You might say, yeah, I created that song, but I can't stop anyone else recording my song. I can't stop anyone else from replicating my song. There's nothing I can do. Just in the same way that if you came up with the Golden Arches trademark of McDonald's, and anyone was able to use that, McDonald's would say, well, what's the point in creating that iconic imagery of the Golden Arches? So it's because the law allows you to enforce your rights that gives those rights economic value. Now, this applies specifically to music. The Copyright Acts around the world, and they're not all identical. Each country has its own, act of government. In our Western system, act of Parliament or Congress, if you're in America. Those laws are not identical around the world, but they do have one basic principle that matters to us in the music industry, and that is that the rights in musical compositions and the rights in sound recordings, those two originally created new works, are protected by copyright. Now, that's a starting point. Trust me, we're going to dive way deeper into how these rights work and how they impact on things like recording contracts and publishing contracts and all sorts of other things. We're going to delve deeply into that. But for now, just recognize that music is protected by copyright, and that, of course, is the basis of the music industry, and we'll come back to that in a lot more detail later. Now, I've just said to you that the law of copyright, whilst it's not identical in any country of the world, it is accepted as a legal and social principle in just about every country of the world. Now, this has been around for a long time. Interestingly, the Europeans were really the first people to acknowledge and understand this idea of owning the rights in your creative works. I'm not going to sit here and give you a lesson in the history of copyright law because you don't need it. What you do need to understand, though, is that just about every country in the world acknowledges that intellectual property exists. They understand that you can own rights in your creative works, and every country, through a series of laws and treaties and agreements and protocols and all of those words that basically sum up agreements between countries on a global basis, copyright in music is recognised right around the world. Now, international law is one of the hardest areas of law, and I'm not even going to attempt to sit here and explain how international law works to you. I have trouble explaining it to myself. It's one of the harder areas of law, and I don't claim to be an expert in it. However, what I can say to you right now is wherever you are watching this lesson from, whatever country you're in, the same principle applies. There's this thing called copyright, and copyright is a part of intellectual property law, and copyright gives you protection for your original works. Specifically, we'll talk about lots of other things, but specifically your musical compositions and the sound recordings that you make. There's a few conditions attached, and we'll go into that in other lessons. So, we're going to come back to this concept of intellectual property over and over and over. Whenever somebody says to me, hey, what's the, music, what is it called? The Music Business Essentials course. What's it about? And one of the first things I say is, oh, well, we cover things like copyright. It's the first thing that comes out of my mouth. It's partly because I'm a lawyer and I understand the significance of this, but it is also because it is so essential on a creative, commercial and legal basis that you understand the law of copyright. And why? Because what it protects is the expression of your art. Everything that you create using your time, your talent, your energy, your passion, your mind, your emotions, and the experiences that you've had in life, everything that you create is yours based on this thing called the law of copyright. And if you look at all of that effort and creativity that goes into your work, it's kind of important that you own the proceeds of basically your life's work. So it's really important. If it hasn't completely sunk in, go back, have another look through this lesson, but we'll be expanding in a lot of detail how this forms the basis of the music industry over the next few lessons in this module. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in Module 2.